This is how it works. Thank you. And most importantly, thank you all for showing up here at 8 o'clock in the morning. That is not easy. Sometimes that is very unpleasant, but you're here, and I appreciate it, whether you have to be or not. It's always a toss-up on these events, whether you want to go on the first day or the second day. And since my very good friend Brian Danzis snaked yesterday's opening speech for his purely selfish reasons, I got stuck with today. And since the snake is not here right now listening to me like I was with him, it's okay. But at the end of the day, I appreciate it very much. I think going on the second day is benefiting me because I really had a chance over the past day and a half to listen to everything that everyone has said on the panels, during the roundtables, in passing, and in discussion. So I actually, at the last minute, changed up what I'm going to do a little bit. What I'm not going to do is discuss or promote the company that I work for. That can be done anytime by a lot of people. What I am going to give you is my honest, straightforward perspective on where I believe the television business is going as it relates to the application of data and technology. Because that's really what we're all here to talk about. It's really what we're all debating and what we're all struggling with. And I honestly don't believe there's a right or there's a wrong. I think we all agree that the business is changing. The television, the video business is changing. The opportunity are there as it relates to the increased amounts of data, the way we're allowed to use data, and how technology is spread across all the various constituents of our business. How we package all of that together and then apply it to achieve the goals and objectives of a holistic media strategy is where it gets challenging, because no strategy is identical, no objective, no KPI is identical. So starting off with something I think we can all broadly agree on, and that's there is consumption changes, right, in our business, which is forcing us to really, really think about it. And even more so than 6 months ago, and even more so than 3 months ago. We all know the drill about the linear content business and how those things are changing. I don't need to beat that horse. We know what's happening with over-the-top viewing, delayed viewing, VOD now expanding to almost every system. Every one of us has our own definition of what advanced television was. I actually want to give a great shout out to DataZoo for their perception and their articulation of it. I thought I agree with it. I thought it was very well. And we all have done very well, and I think we all have our perspective on the overall spend. But none of that is as relevant is how well do we understand it and how do we apply it and where and how does it make sense? Because while this stuff might be among the most exciting stuff in our business, it doesn't necessarily mean it's right for everyone all the time. I always say my primary business tends to skew towards household level addressable targeting, and 25% of the conversations I have with agencies and advertisers, my recommendation back to them is honestly, you know what, based on the size of your target, based on your KPIs, based on what you're looking to achieve, household level addressability is not your best option for A, B, and C reasons. Here's the part that I think is interesting, and this presentation will be available to anyone who has any interest with it, including the case studies at the end. This is the part that keeps me up at night, right? It has become so complicated to understand all the various different dynamics that in many cases, in my opinion, it's causing reactionary decisions. Not necessarily in a bad way, but in a way we're reacting to the marketplace. Whether we are a content provider, a buyer, a seller, a technology company, regardless of what we are or what role we play in this business, it all starts with that top line, right? The major contributing factor to the future of the television business is the application of data, because that data allows us to really refine our audience segments. That does not mean that 75% of our television dollars aren't going to continue, for certain brands, aren't going to continue to go to broad Nielsen-based targets because that fulfills the objectives, the economics work, and we are selling product. But it does mean that we can take this first and third party data, align it up with viewership data, identify audiences, whether it be at the content level, at the zip code level, at the household level, refine the way in which we message, and then tie it back to return on investment. And that's the part that's very exciting to me. So how we do that? It all starts with, in my opinion, it all starts, and I keep saying in my opinion because this is my opinion. There is no right or wrong in this space. All I can do is share with you my experience of working in this space now for a very long time, both on the agency side and now on the platform side. But it all starts with taking first and third party data, tabulating it against viewership data, and identifying our high value audiences. And again, that high value audience can be defined very differently depending on the brand. Then it comes down to what do we do with it, right? There are multiple different tactics that can be applied after we've identified who our high value audience is. It can be all the way over to the left, as granular as targeting down to the household level and tying that ad exposure back to a sale. But we're limited to 60 million households right now. Of that 60 million households, if the target is women with children under 4 that have purchased Aquafresh toothpaste in the past 3 months, perhaps we're left with 3.2 million of those. And we take the 210 DMAs, and that's broken down to 2,900 zones, zones being defined as a cluster of zip codes. Now that has value in geographic targeting. You can take those same high value audiences, index them against those zones, and insert to those zones based on geographic and data related SKUs. Then we have the wild card here, and I call it a wild card because it's definitionally challenged, but huge opportunity when it comes to various different devices. Where I focus my energy and where we at One-to-One focus our energy on is taking the same data source, the same matching agent, the same measurement company, and identifying those household zones, devices across a single campaign, measuring it holistically, and then identifying the unduplicated reach, frequency, and sales for that campaign across all of those. And then we have the big one, and whether we're calling it programmatic, whether we're calling it indexed, whether regardless of the term, we still have the full 118 million footprint of US TV households that we can now start to work with differently. It's no secret, nothing is changing dramatically. For years, we have been taking viewership data and matching it with demographic data. But now we have the opportunity to move beyond basic Nielsen demography and beyond panel-based data and truly start to identify how each network, program, and daypart delivers against a particular audience and optimize or plan our campaigns accordingly. So I want to start with the part that excites me the most and the part that I believe is the hardest to understand and the hardest to make work for any brand on a consistent basis. So when you're looking at household level addressable television, here are some honest, true facts. There are 60 of that 118 million households that have the technology to insert an ad at the household level. That is true. There will be 70 within the next 6 to 8 weeks based on an announcement that you're going to hear next Thursday. It's made up of 10 plus different systems. So to really scale this, and some of the biggest questions we get around what's wrong with this is it's hard to scale, it's a pain in the ass, and I don't know if it works. Well, yes, it is hard to scale because you truly do have to pick up the phone, call multiple systems. They all use different data sources. They report differently, different technology. It is a nuisance. That is a problem that we solve. But at the end of the day, I agree with that. But once you do that, you do have your scale. Calling up one MVPD, placing a campaign, you have no scale. It's going to be challenging to make it actually work. Does it work? Well, that depends on what you do prior to launching the campaign. If you get your segment right, you use the right data source, and you apply the appropriate metric for measurement, 9.5 out of 10 times you will see a positive result. But it is all in the various different planning. So it goes back to a different sort of version of what we looked at before. Right now, the gatekeepers of household level, the majority of household level inventory exist within all of the MVPDs. Yes, it's the majority of it's the 2 minutes per hour. Yes, they all do things differently, but when you identify the targets and the households that you want, it does allow you to refine your targets, reduce your waste, and tie an ad exposure back to a sale. That doesn't mean there's not a whole lot of math that goes into getting that right, and that doesn't mean the outcome of that math and that thinking doesn't lead you to, this is not the right tactic for my particular brand. But I promise you, it is worth going. This stuff is not going away, so it is worth taking the time, going through the process, and determining whether it's right or wrong. And if it was wrong 6, 9, 12 months ago, that doesn't mean it's wrong now. So I wanted to, and this isn't the prettiest chart. I'm not great at making things look pretty. I'm not all that pretty myself. But when it comes to the data, this is the most important part because this is where it starts. When you look at the various different categories, there's multiple different sources and versions of data that can be used, that can be tabulated against viewership data to determine the household, the zip code, the zone, or the content that is best suited to attach your message to based on your hyper target. Now, truthfully, fast forward 5, 10 years, I don't think for the majority of brands, I don't think that more than 20 or 25% of their television budget will ever go to core household level targeting. If we were truly 100% addressable today, the technology would be used for nothing more than managing the frequency to every television viewer of how many times this person saw the ad versus how many times this person saw the ad, or others like it. But when we're in this sort of middle ground stage, to some extent, we're planning and evaluating it in silos. So where does this scale come from? And this is important, and it's worth spending 30 seconds on. The 60 million does come from Altice and Comcast and Dish and AT&T and Oath and Spectrum and Sorensen, and believe it or not, some of it does come from Fox. And so when you add all of these systems up together, you do get your scale. And regardless of your target and who you want to reach, that data set, as long as you identify the data set, it can be matched against those subscriber files, and you can determine what percentage of that 60 million vis-a-vis each one of these individually are actually going to fit your segment. So you might have 16.7 million of that 60 million. Now, where it starts to get interesting is when we get to companies like Sorensen and Fox. Historically, household level addressability has been based around the MVPD, their pipes, their customers, their inventory. And that's still 95% of what we have today. And it's working well despite the inconsistencies among one another. We now have the ability in certain areas to work with smart TVs using broadcast data. We have the ability to work with national inventory that has now been packaged along with some of these systems. All of that is contributing to the evolution of household level addressable marketing that can be tied back to a sale that gives you the scale that you need. I'm not suggesting it's not work. I'm agreeing with you it's a pain in the ass, but the value is there. Of the thousands and thousands of these campaigns that we've done, we have a 93% return rate. And the difference between the 93 that have come back and increased their spend with us and the 7% that haven't has been 100% our fault. We've gotten the target wrong, we've done the match wrong, we've measured it wrong, we've allocated the inventory wrong. Our fault, right? It either, if you do it right, if you get your segment right, if you get your data source right, if you measure it properly, it's going to work. Because if it doesn't, you should have noticed that before the campaign started and recommended back to the agency or advertiser, this isn't the right thing to do. So this is hard to see, but at the end of the day, television historically has been, my commercial's running, I'm selling my soup. My Commercial's not running, I'm not selling my soup. The beauty of this addressable dynamic ad insertion capability and functionality is that we can tie it back to sales. We can tie it back to web traffic. We can tie it back to a brand health study, foot traffic, and we can do it in an isolated manner. Just because you're running an addressable initiative does not mean that there's not tons of other national and local television advertising going on. There are mechanisms of having a control versus an exposed, so you can determine the performance of the addressable initiative versus everything else. And I'm going to share with you some real case studies of what's working and, frankly, what's not. So the only plug that I'm going to give to the company that I work for is now, because that truly is where what I believe is necessary to move this forward. Nobody, agencies, advertisers, they don't, and I know, I spent 20 years at one, they don't have the time and the bandwidth to actually do this. It needs to be platform-based. Platform-based keeps it independent. Platform-based gives every agency and advertiser the ability to have their own input and secret sauce and not have everything be an equal playing field. And that is what we have, and that is what we operate, and our tool allows us to do that. What it might take somebody else 3 weeks to determine how many households are in the market for a luxury station wagon across 12 systems, it takes us 10 minutes because our system's plugged into all of those various systems. So you get the picture of how a platform works. Part of it, ours is used as an internal function, get double the work done with half the people. Part of it is an external function customized for each of our clients at the agencies, so it works within their feed. Knowing that this is going to wrap up in about 5 minutes, I wanted to actually share some case studies with you on what has worked and talk a little bit about what we could have done better. The easiest way to talk about addressability, and that's why I put it first, is the automotive, right? The higher, the smaller the target, the higher the price of the brand, the more value you're going to get out of this. But look at the targeting capabilities. Owners of cars, you can really cherry pick the individual vehicles that you want to determine who's in the market for, and you can measure it back to sales. And this is something that we've actually done. This is a real campaign. And the most important thing is during that campaign, 4,000 cars were sold. However, 475 of them were attributed to this particular campaign. And I left that up there because you don't want to give credit where credit is not due. So during the length of this relatively short campaign, there were 4,000 cars sold, and the majority of those cars sold were due to the national and local tier 1, 2, and 3 advertising that was going on. But that portion of it was attributed directly to this, and that did relate into an increase of 12% and a 5-to-1 return on ad spend, and this campaign budget went from 5 to 20 million overnight. When you look at CPG, it's very easy to say packaged goods is really hard to make this work. We're talking about a $2 tube of toothpaste, a $5 tube of shampoo, and it was really hard to make that work. And I learned one of the most valuable lessons I learned in the early stages of this was at my previous agency. I was sitting with an account director, and we were talking about this, and it was a big CPG brand. And she said to me, all this stuff sounds good, but my company that I'm working with has been around for 75 years. Our national cable CPM is $6. I can buy a lot of waste with $6. This isn't going to work. So we went through, and she had 83 different brands, and we went through 83 different brands, and of the 83, we found 4 of them to where the math actually suggested that an addressable approach could make sense. And at the end of the day, we ended up with this. We ended up targeting individual households based on purchase level. We've done 500 of these campaigns to date, but the attribution, the impact, was an increase in sales. And it was an increase in sales as much that both the agency we worked with and the advertiser unanimously and holistically agreed that this made sense. So for 95% of her brands, it didn't make sense. But for a few, it did. And that's part of the honest, sort of non-self-serving approach that I believe we all have to take to this. Because there are so many constituents involved in pulling off a stunt, like identifying a household that suffers from high cholesterol, might be taking Lipitor, and to send them a Crestor ad, then determine if they actually switch to Crestor, that takes a lot of people and a lot of different companies. And unfortunately, a lot of these various different constituents are out for their own self-serving interests. Everybody wants to get paid. Everybody wants to play their part. Very few look at the picture holistically, right? And that's the burden that agencies have. Agencies don't have the luxury of just picking it apart piece by piece. They have to look at the whole industry holistically, determine what's best for their client, and cut through the noise, and that's where we help. Tune-in. Makes a lot of sense. Identifying households that have watched the previous season of the show, liked shows, tying it back to tune-in. Works very, very, very well, right? There's never been a tune-in advertiser, and we've worked with over 10 television networks where we haven't seen a positive increase. So at the end of the day, where I really believe this is going is I believe there's tremendous opportunity. I do believe the scale is there. I do believe the value is there. I do not believe it is for everyone, but I do think it's worth everyone's time to think it through. But at the end of the day, because it's so complicated, it does need to be platform-based. Now, everybody has a platform. Everybody will say they have a platform. The difference between a platform and a platform that'll work for you is a platform that tailors their needs to the individual agency or advertiser so they can apply their own intellectual property. Thank you very much. Appreciate the time.